Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about a very important event in the history, in the world history that has happened in the China. However, it also involved a lot of European powers, colonial powers especially. So this event is what we know today by the name of Opium Wars. Now, two Opium Wars had happened between the China and the European powers. So what were the reason behind these Opium Wars? What has been the impact of this opium war on China and the nearby regions as well as on the world, and what is its significance in the world history. So let us first of all try to understand. As we have discussed, the first opium war happened since this war was largely held between the British forces and Chinese forces. It is also referred by many historians as the Anglo-Chinese War. So this war was fought between March of 1839 to almost August 29, 1842. As a result of this war, about 69 British troops lost their life and approximately 18,000 Chinese soldiers died. Similarly, Second Opium War, which is also referred by the name of Arrow War due to the involvement of a ship that was called as Arrow. This war was fought almost between October 23, 1856 to October 1860. As a result of this war, almost 2,900 Western troops were killed or wounded, while China had lost almost 12,000 to 30,000 troops. So let us first try to understand the background in which this war has happened. So if we go back to somewhere about 18th century, the beginning of 18th century, in 1700s, many European nations, colonial powers especially such as Britain, Netherlands, as well as France, they were trying to expand their trade networks, especially in the continent of Asia. And what better than China, which was for a very long period of time, for almost 1,000 years, has been the eastern endpoint of the well-known Silk Road. And China was also a source of very fabulous luxury items which were in high demand in the European market. And thus, the European countries such as Britain, Holland, and France, they wanted to connect with China as a source of one of the most desirable finished products such as tea, silk, and all. And thus, they wanted to expand or strengthen their trade tie with the Qing Empire, Qing dynasty, which were ruling China at that particular point of time. Especially in this regard, most of the we can say steps, or what we can say, the most important steps were taken by two joint stock companies. One, British East India Company, and other was the Dutch East India Company. So these two companies were the major trading companies that were connecting the Europe to the Asia, especially China. However, these companies suffered a lot of problems in the China, because if we talk about European companies, European traders, China actually had not allowed them free trade activities, and they had a lot of limitations that were put onto them. For example, Chinese government had limited their expansion, and they could not have moved further beyond the commercial port of Canton. Not only that, if any foreigners, any European especially, try to leave the port city and enter into the mainland China, inland China, they were threatened with harsh penalties, which were imposed also many times. Similarly, since the Chinese feared that if they learn the local Chinese language, they will be able to expand their trading link ties at a much more faster speed, and thus they were also not allowed to learn Chinese language, so that they are not able to freely communicate with the local population. But most worst of all, these were because the demand of Chinese products in Europe was very higher, especially for Chinese silk, Chinese porcelain, as well as Chinese tea. However, if you look at the consumers of China, they did not want anything to do with the European manufactured goods, and that is why this led to a problem of trade deficit between the European powers and the Chinese empire. Not only that, since the Qing dynasty required payment not in any type of goods but in cold hard cash, which that time used to be silver. So all this led to development of, as we discussed, trade deficit between Britain and China, because since Qing dynasty wanted their payment to be in silver and Britain did not have any kind of domestic silver supply, so it has to depend either on the Mexico for we can say obtaining silver, or on the other colonial powers who had silver mines under their occupation. Not only that, due to the high demand of tea in the Britain, UK imported more than 6 tons of Chinese tea annually, and due to this, within half a century, Britain managed to sell just only 9 million pounds of British goods to China, at the same time in exchange taking almost 27 million pounds of Chinese import. Now, British knew that this in long term cannot be sustainable because the trade deficit is very, very huge. Thus, they wanted to find some solution. And the best solution which they found was in having another kind of trade that is called as opium trade. Opium was very much in demand in China because especially once British started to introduce opium or trade opium, British companies started to trade opium in China. The quality of opium which British traders brought were of very high quality, much more stronger, and thus 90% of young men along China's east coast were addicted to smoking opium by 1830s. Due to this high demand of opium and British being a big supplier of opium, finally in some years trade balance swung in the favor of Britain on the back of this illegal opium smuggling. If we try to understand the opium smuggling route, as you know, Britain also had control over countries such as India, Bangladesh, Myanmar. So Britain, as we can see from the map, is situated here. They wanted to have strong trade interlinkage with China, from where there they used to bring a lot of silk, porcelain, and tea. And in terms of payment, they did not pay silver. Now they started to trade opium, sell opium in China, and the local silver which they got from Chinese consumers, then they used to send the sales, supply the same silver to the Qing dynasty or Qing emperors. So thus China got in Great Britain, we can say, got involved in three country trade, and thus was able to solve the issue of trade deficit with China. Now it is in this background the first Opium War happened. Now there are several incidents that has proved as a starting point or inflection point of the Opium War. The first is in 1839. Once China's Daoguang emperor, he understood that British are illegally selling opium in country. He appointed a very strict governor in the Canton region who was called as Lin Zexu. So Lin Zexu was very much against the opium trade, and thus he imposed a lot of harsh penalties on opium traders. Also arrested a lot of sellers, a lot of people on the ships who are involved in illegal opium smuggling. And in this context, in July 1839, there is an incident that has happened that is called as Kowloon incident. In the Kowloon town of China, there was some sort of dispute that arose between the British and American sailors on one hand and the local Chinese priest on the other hand. Due to this, the local Chinese priest was actually killed in this brawl. However, when the Chinese asked Britain to punish these culprits, they were not given, or they were not basically sent to the Chinese court. Rather, British say that they will try them themselves. However, after the sentence, they were not even allowed to, what we can say, fulfill their sentences, fulfill their punishment. They were simply freed upon reaching the England. Thus, the Qing officials, they are very much reacted against this decision or against this step of Britain, and they said that no British or any other foreigner merchant would be allowed to trade with China unless they agreed to abide by the Chinese law. And in this regard, the British superintendent of trade in China that time, Charles Elliot, he said that we did not agree to this demand and suspended all British trade with China and ordered all British ships to withdraw from the Chinese port. However, as we know that it is not only the British government or Royal Navy that is involved here, there is also a lot of private parties that are involved in illegal opium trade. And in this context, one private British ship by the name of Thomas Scout, they said that will continue with the trade with China, and thus they signed the Qing legal bond and began trading after accepting all the terms and agreements of the Qing dynasty. However, the Britain responded by blockading the trade route, especially at the mouth of Pearl River. And then when another British private trading ship by the name of Royal Saxon entered into the territory of China, Royal Navy started firing upon these ships. However, since Qing dynasty already has signed the agreement with the private traders, they responded by attacking the Royal Navy. As a result of this, on one hand, we have the ships of the Royal Navy. On the other hand, we have the private British merchant ships as well as the Qing Empire ships. However, since the British were British were using high-tech ships at that time, and thus they were able to siege Canton, which is known by the name of Guangdong today, Chuzan, Shanghai, and thus they were able to gain full control in the mouth of critical Yangtze River, which is flowing to the China Sea through the port of Shanghai, and also the mouth of the Pearl River. This causes humiliation. This caused humiliation to the Chinese Empire, and they stunned by this, humiliated by this, they finally agreed and sued for a peace treaty. And thus, as is the end of the First Opium War, a treaty of Nanjing was signed between China and the Great Britain, where it was heavily humiliated. China, as a result of this treaty, suffered from economic hardship. It also faced serious loss of sovereignty as well as loss of prestige both domestically as well as outside of China. Because China was considered for a long period of time as the superpower of East Asia. However, the First Opium War exposed Qing China as only paper tiger. The neighbors, particularly Japan, took note of its weakness, which they would use in the future wars. Now, few years after the First Opium War and the signing of Treaty of Nanjing, another incident happened in China that is popularly known as Arrow incident. Now, Arrow was basically a smuggling ship which was registered in China but based out of Hong Kong. And that time, Hong Kong was a British crown colony. So when the ship entered into the Chinese water, Chinese officials boarded the ship and arrested several of its crew, 12 to be exact, on suspicion of smuggling and piracy. Once these crew was arrested, British lodged a very strong protest because they said that Hong Kong-based ships is outside of China's jurisdiction, and as per the Treaty of Nanjing, the crew member who have been arrested by Britain should be given back to the Britain. And thus, this is how we can say one incident was what led to the beginning of the Second Opium War. So UK was involved in the Second Opium War in the first stage. However, the another incident that happened in China that is called as Auguste Chapdelaine incident. Auguste Chapdelaine was basically a French Catholic missionary who was trying to convert local Chinese into Christianity. Thus, he was arrested by the Chinese government and he was sent to jail on the charges of forceful conversion. However, when he was in jail, Chinese jailers beat him so much that this French Catholic missionary died. Taking advantage of this incident, then France also declared war on China and joined the British forces. Thus, together, the Anglo-French forces attacked the China and captured Guangzhou, Guangdong, and Taku forts near what is that time called as Tianjin. Today it is called as city of Tianjin. As a result of the Second Opium War, now when the Anglo-French forces in combined form are attacking Chinese territory, attacking Chinese forces, China has no other option but to surrender and was then again forced to sign another punitive treaty that is called as Treaty of Tianjin in the June of 1858. And as a result of Treaty of Tianjin, China has to give a lot of concessions to the Anglo-French forces and also to the other European powers. For example, as an end of this result of this treaty, UK, France, Russia, United States, they were allowed to establish official embassies in the Peking, which is modern day it is known by the name of the capital of China, that is Beijing. Also, Chinese were forced to give 11 additional ports to the foreign traders, not only the Canton port. Free navigation of foreign vessels were allowed up to the Yangtze River, and also foreigners were allowed to travel into the interior of China, that means beyond the territory of Canton. Not only that, economically, China was also exploited, where it had to pay a war indemnity of almost 8 million tiles of silver to both France and Britain, where one tile referred to 37 gram. So 37 into 8 million grams of silver had to be paid by the China as a result of this treaty. Not only that, taking advantage of this weak position of China, Russia at that time took advantage of this and they negotiated another treaty where they took control of the entire northern bank of the Amur that is flowing here. As we can see, this is the Amur River. So the northern bank of Amur River, the territory of China was captured by the Russia. And coincidentally, after a few years, Russia will build its first eastern port in this region that is today well known as Vladivostok. So Vladivostok today is under the Russian control. However, at one point of time, it was a part of China, which was forcefully annexed by taking advantage of the weak Chinese empire. Now, gradually, if we try to understand once the first and second opium war ended, what has been its aftermath or after effect? So, its aftermath in effect is observed on many players. For example, the Qing dynasty, which was ruling China at that time, the end of Second Opium War basically can be considered as a beginning of a slow descent of the Qing dynasty into an oblivion, which finally ended in year 1912 when the Qing Emperor Pui abdicated the throne. Also, it was the harsh and severe provisions of Treaty of Tianjin, which many nationalists of China, local Chinese population, especially belonging to Han ethnic community, they considered this as a what we can say as a shameful incident, And this also sparked or ignited what we call as the Boxer Rebellion of 1900. Boxer Rebellion was basically a rebellion of the local Han Chinese population against the increasing influence of foreign powers, European powers, and increasing role of Christian missionaries and the imposition of the Christian values on the local population. The most important incident, the most important effect is what we see in the case of Japan. Japan taking what we can say lesson from the Chinese Opium War. It served as both revelation as well as warning for them, because Japan then realized that if they did not take any measures right now, the same fate could visit them also, and foreign powers, European powers, can do same to Japan what they have done to China. Thus, Opium War acted as a cautionary tale to the Japanese Empire, and thus began what we know as one of the most important movement or one most important event in the history of Japan, which is referred by the name of Meiji Restoration. The Meiji Restoration basically aimed on modernization as well as the militarization of the entire Japanese population. And as a result of this, by year 1895, Japan became a much more modern state with a Western style army. And thus, in 1895, they waged a war against China that is called as Sino-Japanese War, where they won and occupy the Korean peninsula. Now, this incident will have a very important repercussions even into the 20th century, because even till now, we know that Korean War largely it can be traced back, it traced its origin to this incident. Even you talk about the disputed island that is between the China and Japan can also be traced back to this particular Sino-Japanese War. So that is all about the Opium War. I hope you understood about the importance and significance of this war. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share it with full aspirants, as well as subscribe to our channel for more such content. Thank you very much.